self-interest. That some nations think that just because they happen to sit on top of raw materials, that those raw materials belong to them. And we all know that in a period of Malthusian shortages, of overpopulation, of scarce resources, that this can't be tolerated. You can't allow these selfish nations to hold the world hostage. So we have to fix that. We're going to fix that with a corporate structure, because the corporation isn't bound by these kinds of old-fashioned, silly ideas. The corporation is more interested in efficiency. We're getting the raw materials and distributing them in the most efficient way, which means at the most profit.
Even as some of the polymorphically perverse hippies of the 60s transformed throughout the 70s into the greed-is-good capitalists of the 80s, they never lost their utter aversion to all things technological. The real technological optimism of Roosevelt's recovery was supplanted by the fraud of information technology. Science was replaced by science fiction, and the boomers sought to make their programmed fantasies a reality. The cultural willingness to accept the first phase of the triple curve collapse function had been established. Upon accomplishing this, the financial establishment launched a full-scale takedown of the social and economic reforms created by Franklin Roosevelt. Throughout the course of the 1970s, a series of operations were run with the intention of replacing the U.S. physical economy with a massive parasitical debt bubble. In 1971, a grouping of financier interests led by George Shultz and Felix Rohatyn made the decision to officially decouple the dollar from gold. This marked the end of the Bretton Woods system of international development as it had been established by Roosevelt.
We will press for the necessary reforms to set up an urgently needed new international monetary system.
The dollar was now officially detached from the physical economy and free to be transformed entirely into an instrument of speculation. Currency exchange rates were permitted to fluctuate wildly, and long-term investment into national development projects became an impossibility for the underdeveloped areas of the globe. This was consolidated in the period between 1973 and 1974, when a staged oil crisis was used to create the so-called euro-dollar market. Royal Dutch Shell and its bankers, Rothschild and Felix Rohatyn's Lazard, set up the oil spot market and made the dollar the currency of international oil trade. This raised the value of the dollar, while at the same time placing a huge pool of dollars into the hands of speculators outside of the United States, to be used as the major instrument in the attacks which were to follow. Throughout the 1970s, the very notion of a physically productive enterprise was eaten up in a series of so-called mergers and acquisitions. In reality, this represented a steady rebuilding of the kind of cartelization which Roosevelt had worked so hard to destroy. The legitimate American entrepreneurial enterprise was slowly overrun by profit-obsessed megacorporations. Leveraged buyouts of businesses became the norm. Formerly productive industries were looted and turned into short-term money-making machines. As in Weimar Germany under the conditions of Versailles, the value of financial aggregates, again in the form of debt and stock market valuation, began to spiral upwards out of control. In 1975, Felix Rohatyn, playing the role of a modern-day Hjalmar Schacht, was appointed head of the Municipal Assistance Corporation, Big Mac, in charge of handling the financial crisis which New York City was then experiencing. Aside from the brutal austerity policies implemented by Rohatyn during that process, this set the standard for the ultimate aims of Rohatyn and his financial controllers. Private money would now be allowed to run public policy. Finally, In 1979, Federal Reserve Chairman Paul Volcker instituted a policy which the Council on Foreign Relations had dubbed the controlled disintegration of the U.S. economy. This took the form of an enormous hike in the interest rate, a move which devastated the U.S. productive sector. With the rate of interest on loans in the range of 21% per year, long-term investments became an impossibility. Any business venture with the intent of promoting physical development was doomed to failure, and short-term money-making schemes thrived. This marked the beginning of a period of absolute lunacy economically and culturally.
Basically, in the 1980s, you had all of these rules that were designed to protect the economy and protect citizens from these rapacious banking practices were dismantled. And the policies were set just the other way to favor this sort of thing and encourage it. And so this continued. By the end of the 1980s, the whole system was bankrupt.
During this period, one of the major firewalls established by Franklin Roosevelt to defend the American people was deliberately targeted and destroyed. The savings and loan banks, barred from speculative activities by Roosevelt in order to ensure the availability of low-interest, long-term loans for housing and other needs, were opened to predatory speculation. The model for the modern stock market was established, nominally, by Michael Milken, who used mafia money to build up Las Vegas, inventing the so-called junk bond.
The case of Michael Milken illustrates how the system actually works, because what Milken did, and I think it was about 1978, was to set up in Beverly Hills, California, an office of Drexel Burnham Lambert, the investment bank, which was based in New York. And the Beverly Hills office was a place where he started selling junk bonds. He created the junk bond business. And a junk bond is, by definition, a corporate security which has a credit rating of less than investment grade. So it's commonly called a junk bond or a high yield bond. Now, to understand it, you have to take it out of the realm of a business story or a financial story. It's not really about bond ratings and things like that. And what they would do is that Milken would go to a company, let's say a casino, Steve Wynn's casino, because he helped build Las Vegas. You want to build a fancy new casino, we'll raise money by selling bonds. And since up to that point, the bond market had been only investment grade, blue chip companies. People thought of bonds as being very safe. So this idea that you would have these companies that might not really make it, that were somewhat shaky, issue bonds, this was a new thing.
Milken's monsters, as they were known, became the model for stock market speculation, finally obliterating the already thin line between organized crime and Wall Street. By the end of the 1980s, the entire U.S. economy was in a state of collapse. This collapse culminated with Black Monday in October of 1987, when the markets plunged 20%, setting the stage for the creation of the largest financial bubble in history by the new chairman of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, who had been installed shortly before the collapse.
At that point, Greenspan said, I'm coming in, I'm going to fix everything. And he started this particular hyperinflationary system. He said, we can invent money. It was based on Michael Milken and Michael Milken's kind of experiment in California. Michael Milken went to prison for that. Huh? Greenspan legalized it and expanded it.
Again, an increasing flow of money, looted from the collapsing physical economy, was required to feed this ballooning bubble. This time, however, the money was not paper, but digital. And this time, the effects of hyperinflation were partially masked for the American population by the introduction of a policy of what was called euphemistically globalization.